do not think I will give you my teaching in the form of a pill. I think that would be difficult. Perhaps that will come later. That is always how it ends. When you have been dead long enough, you find yourself summed up in 3 lines of textbook. Hyphen, hyphen. Though, where I am concerned, I'm not too sure which textbook it will be. I cannot foresee which textbooks I will figure in because I cannot foresee anything to do with the future of my teaching, or, in other words, psychoanalysis. We don't know what will become of this psychoanalysis. For my part, I do hope it becomes something, but it is not certain that that's the way it is heading. You can see from that my title, the place, origin, and end of my teaching, can begin to take on a meaning that is more than just summative. What I am trying to do is to let you in on something that is underway, that is in train, something that is unfinished, and that will probably be finished only when I am finished, if I don't have one of those annoying accidents that make you outlive yourself. There again, I'm telling you I'm not heading in that direction. It's like a well-constructed dissertation, with a start, a beginning, and an end. Place. Because we really do have to begin at the beginning. To place. This. 1. In the beginning there was not the origin, there was the place. There were perhaps 2 or 3 people here who have some idea about this same old story of mine. Place is a term I often use because there are often references to place in the field that my discourse, hyphen, hyphen, or my discourse, if you prefer, hyphen, hyphen, deal with. If you want to know where you are in that field, it is advisable to have what other and more self-assured domains called a topology, and to have some idea how the support on which what it is at stake is inscribed is instructed. I certainly will not get far this evening, because I absolutely refuse to give you my teaching in the form of a little pill. Not. Place means something very different here from what it means in topology, in the sense of structure, where it is just a question of knowing whether a surface is a sphere or a ring, because what can be done with it is not at all the same. But that is not what this is about. Place can have very different meaning. It simply means the place I have come to, and which puts me in a position to teach, given that there is such thing as teaching. Well, that place has to be inscribed in the register of what is our common fate. You occupy the place where an act pushes you, just like that, from the right or left, any old way. It so happens that circumstances were such that, truth to tell, I really do not think it was my destiny, and, well, I just had to grab hold of the thread. It all revolves around the fact that the function of the psychoanalysis is not self-evident. That when it comes to giving him his status, his habits, his reference, and even his place in the world, nothing is obvious, nothing is self-evident at all. There are the places I talked about first, topological places that have to do with essence, and then there is your place in the world. You usually get to that place by pushing and shoving. In short, it leaves you some hope. And no matter how many of you there are, you will always end up in a certain place, with a bit of luck. It goes no further than that. So far as my place is concerned, things go back to the year 1953. At that time in psychoanalysis in France, we were in what might be called a moment of crisis. There was talk of setting up an institutional mechanism to settle the future status of psychoanalysts, all accompanied by big election promises. If you go along with Mr. So-and-so, we were told, the status of psychoanalysts will quickly be granted all sorts of official sanctions and blessings, hyphen, hyphen, especially medical sanctions and blessings. As is the rule with promises of this kind, nothing came of them, and yet something was set up as a result. It so happens that this change did not suit everyone for extremely contingent reasons. So long as there had not been settled, there could we, hyphen, hyphen, were, hyphen, hyphen, frictions, what we call conflicts. In the midst of this commotion, I found myself along with a number of others on a raft. For 10 years we lived on, well, on whatever came to hand. We weren't completely without resources, we weren't completely down and out. And in the midst of all that, it so happened that what I had to say about psychoanalysis began to have a certain import. These are not things that happen all by themselves. You can talk about psychoanalysis just like that. Bah! It is very easy to verify that people do not talk about it like that. It is not quite so easy to talk about it every week, making it a rule never to say the same thing twice, and never to say what is already familiar, even though you know that what is already familiar is not exactly unessential. But when it is already familiar, seems to you to leave a lot to be desired, seems to you to be based on a false premise, then it has very different repercussions. Everyone thinks they have an adequate idea of what psychoanalysis is. The unconscious, well, it's the unconscious. Psychoanalysis is the knowing of a specific moment that is going to happen, a very specific instance, and recognizing that it's happening, but not actually happening, but only occurring within the body. This instant. Nowadays, everyone knows there is such a thing as an unconscious. There are no more problems, no more objects, no more obstacles, but what is this unconscious? We've always known about the unconscious, of course. There are a lot of things that are unconscious, and of course, everyone has been talking about them for a long time in philosophy. But in psychoanalysis, the unconscious is an unconscious that thinks hard. It's crazy what can be dreamed up in that unconscious. Thoughts, they say. Just a minute. If they are thoughts, it can't be unconscious. The moment the unconscious begins to think, it thinks that it's thinking. Thought is transparent to itself. You can't think without knowing you are thinking. Of course, that objection no longer carries any weight at all. Not that anyone has any real idea of what is refutable about it. It seems refutable, but it is irrefutable. And that is precisely what the unconscious is. It's a fact, a new fact. We have to begin to think up something that can explain why there are such things as unconscious thoughts. It's not self-evident. No one has in fact got down to doing that, and yet it is an eminently philosophical question. I will tell you from the outset that that is not how I set about it. It happened so. It so happened that the way I did set about it easily refutes that objection, but it is no longer really an objection because everyone now absolutely convinced on that point. Well then, the unconscious has been accepted. But there again, we think that a lot of other things have been accepted, prepackaged, and just as they come, and the outcome is that everyone thinks they know what psychoanalysis is apart from psychoanalysts, and that really is worrying. They are the only ones not to know. It's not only that they do not know up to a point that is quite reassuring. If they thought they were straight away, just like that, matters would be serious and there would be no psychoanalysis at all. Ultimately, everyone is in agreement. Psychoanalysis, the matter is closed. But it can't be for psychoanalysis. And this is where things begin to get interesting. There are two ways of proceeding in such cases. The first is to try to be as with it as possible and to call it into question. An operation and experience a technique about which the techniques are forced to admit that they have nothing to say when it comes to what is most central, most essential now. That would be something to see, wouldn't it? That might stir up a lot of sympathy because there are, after all, a lot of things to do with our common fate that are like that, and they are precisely the things psychoanalysis is interested in. The only problem is that, well, psychoanalysts have, as fate would have it, always adopt the opposite attitude. They do not say that they know in so many words, but that they imply that they do. We know a bit about it, but let's keep quiet about that. Let's keep it between ourselves. We enter this field of knowledge by way of a unique experience that consists, quite simply, in being psychoanalyzed. After that, you can talk. Being able to talk does not mean that you do talk. You could if you wanted to, and you could want to if you were talking to people like us, people who are in the know. But what's the point? This is the point. And so remain silent with those who do not know, with those who don't know, because those who don't know can't know. Enough. After all, it is the tenable position they adopted, so that proves it's tenable. Even so, it's not to everyone's liking. That means somewhere the psychoanalysis is a weak spot, a very big weak spot. What I have said so far may seem comical to you, but these are not weaknesses. It is coherent, only there is something that makes the analyst change his attitude, and that is where it begins to become incoherent. The psychoanalyst knows perfectly well that he has to be careful not to surrender to his temptation, to his penchant. In his day practice, he does watch his step. Psychoanalysis in the collective sense, on the other hand, or psychoanalysts, when there's a crowd of them, a host of them, want it to be known that they are there for the good of all. They are very careful, however, not to move straight from this good of all to the good of the individual, a particular patient, because experience has taught them that wishing people well, bien, all too often, brings about the opposite effect. It is rather in their dealings with the outside world that psychoanalysts become close to being real propagandists. No, insofar as they are represented as a profession of psychoanalysis, absolutely want to be on the right side, on the winning side. And so, in order to prove that they are They have to demonstrate that what they do, what they say, has already been found somewhere, that it has already been said, that it is already something you come across when you come to the same crossroads in other sciences. You say something similar, namely that it is not all that new, that you already thought of it. And so we relate this unconscious to old rumors, erase the line that would allow us to see that the Freudian consciousness has absolutely to do with what was called the unconsciousness before Freud. The word had been used, but it is not the fact that the unconscious is unconscious that is a characteristic of it. The unconscious is not a negative characteristic. Negative and not feminine. There are lots of things in my body which I am not conscious, and that are absolutely not part of the Freudian conscious. The body takes an interest in it from time to time is not why the unconscious working of the bodies are at stake in the Freudian unconscious. I give you this example because I do not want to go too far. Let me simply add that they even go so far as to say that the sexuality that they talk about is the same thing that biologists talk about. Absolutely not. It's a sales platter. Bonament. Ever since Freud, the psychoanalytic crew have been propagandizing in a style that the word bonament captures very well. And now, you have the good, le bon, and then you have the wishing them well, le bien. What that I was telling you about just now. This really has become second nature for psychoanalysts when they are among themselves. The issues that are really at stake, that bother them, and that can even lead to serious conflicts with them are issues for those who know. And when they are talking to people who don't know, they tell them things that are intended to be in a way, as an easy way in. It's standard practice, part of the psychoanalytic style. It's a tenable position. It's not at all within the field of what we call the coherent. But after all, we know a lot of things in the world that survive on that basis. It is a part of what has always been done in a certain register, and it is not for nothing that I have described it as propaganda. This term has been very specific origins in history and the psychological, sociological structure. It is a propaganda there. It's the name of a building somewhere in Rome where anyone can come and go. So that's what they do, and that's what they have always done. The question is whether or not it is tenable where psychoanalysis is concerned. Simply a therapy, a drug, a plaster, a mental cure, or indeed something that can never be described as a cure? At first sight, why not? The only problem is that they are certainly not what psychoanalysis is. We first have to admit that if that is what it is, we would really have to ask why we are forced to put it on, because of all the plasters, this is one of the most fastidious to have to put up with. Despite that, if people do commit themselves to this hellish business of coming to see a guy 3 times a week for years, it must be because it has some interest in itself, using words that you don't understand spirit does not explain why it lasts. We are just outside the door, so I really do have to begin at the beginning. If I'm not to talk more sales platter or pretend, I thought you knew something about psychoanalysis. Nothing I am saying here is new. Not only is it not new, it's staring you in the face. Everyone quickly notices that everything that is said about psychoanalysis, by way of explanation, ad usum plebiscium, is sales patter, and not. No one can be in any doubt about that, because after a while you can recognize sales patter when you hear it. Well, the funny thing is that this is 1967, and a thing that began, roughly speaking, at the beginning of the century, or let's say 4 or 5 years earlier, if you want to go a little further back. If you really want to call what Freud was doing when he was on his own psychoanalysis, well, it's still here. Despite all that patter, psychoanalysis is alive and well, and even enjoys a kind of respect, prestige, a sort of presence effect that is quite unusual if we think of the demand made by the scientific mind. From time to time, those who are scientists get annoyed, protest, and shrug their shoulders, but something still remains, so much so that people who are capable of making the most disparaging comments about psychoanalysis will at other times invoke some fact or other, some psychoanalytic principle or precept psychoanalyst, or invoke what is known about a certain experience, as though that were the psychoanalytic experience. It makes you think all the same. There has been a lot of sales patter in history, but if we look very closely, none of it has gone for this long. There really must be something to it, something something that psychoanalysis keeps to itself, something that gives it this dignity, gives it some weight. This is something. Carry a heavy weight. To carry a heavy weight. This is something that it keeps very much to itself, and in a position that I have sometimes called by the name it deserves: extraterrestrial. Of trying, of tried, and not from where tried in error the place I least. It is worth thinking about. It is in any case the main interest of the question I am trying to introduce here. Here, there are in fact still people who have no idea at all what psychoanalysis is, who are not part of it, but who have heard of it, who have heard such things about it that they use the term when they want to find a name for a certain way of operating. They turn out books for it to be called the psychoanalysis of Lorraine, or of the common market, and not. That is really an introductory step, but it does have the virtue of stating very clearly, and with no more reference than is required, the mystery surrounding some of the words we use, words that have their own shock effect, if that makes sense. And not the word truth, for example. What is the truth? This is the truth. Well, psychoanalysis is one of those words. At first, everyone feels that it means something very special. Above all, that truth is. When this case articulated with a mode of representation that gives the word psychoanalysis style and gives it its second job, if I can put it that way. The truth in question is exactly the same as in the mythical image that represents it. It is something hidden in nature, and then it comes out quite naturally and emerges from the well. It comes out. But that isn't enough. It speaks. It says things. Usually things we were not expecting. That's what we hear when we say, at least we know the truth about this business. Someone is beginning to come clean. When we talk about psychoanalysis, I mean when we refer to this thing that lends it some weight, that is what we are talking about, including the appropriate correlative effect, which is what we call the surprise effect. One of my students said to me one day when he was drunk, and not, he's been perpetually drunk for some time now, because from time to time in life there are things that get nailed to the cross, and not that I was like Jesus Christ, and not, he was obviously taking the piss, wasn't he? Goes without saying. I have nothing at all in common with the incarnation. I'm more the Pontius Pilate type. Pontius Pilate had no luck, and nor do I. He said a thing that is really commonplace and easy to say. What is truth? He had no luck. He asked the question of truth itself. That got him into all kinds of bother, and he does not have a good reputation. I really like Claudel. It's one of my weaknesses because I'm no Catholic. La. Claudel, with the incredible divinatory genius he always had, gave Pontius Pilate a few more years of life. When Pilate went for a walk, he says, whenever Pilate walked in front of what we call in Claudian language, of course, an idol, as though an idol were something repugnant. Ugh. Well, because I suppose he had raised the question of truth precisely where he shouldn't have done. Idol, I-D-O-L, or I-D-L-E. Have idol, have idol. I suppose he had raised the question of truth precisely where he shouldn't have done. In truth, every time he walked in front of the idol, poof, the idol's belly opened, and you could see that it was just a piggy bank. Well, much the same thing happened to me. You have no idea what effect I have on psychoanalytic idols. Let's start again. We obviously have to take things one step at a time. The first step is that of the truth. After what psychoanalysts have said about truth, or what they think it has said since it began to talk, it no longer impresses anyone, naturally. When something has been said and said again enough times, it becomes part of general awareness. As Max Jacob used to say, and I tried to reproduce at the end of one of my écrits, the truth is always new, and not. If it is to be true, it has to be new. No. Quote, being new and strange is real. No. So, you have to believe that what truth is not said in quite the same way when everyday discourse repeats it. You can't believe. And then there are some things that have changed. The psychoanalytic truth was that there was something terribly important at the bottom of it, and everything that has hatched up when it comes to the interpretation of truth, namely sexual life. Is that true or not true? If it is true, we need to know that it was only because this was at the height of the Victorian age when sexuality was an important part of life, each and every one, as it is now, of everyone's life. But all the same, something has changed. Sexuality is something much more public. In truth, I do not think that psychoanalysis had much to do with that. Well, let's argue that if psychoanalysis did have something to do with it, that is precisely what I'm saying, then this is not really psychoanalysis. For the moment, the reference to sexuality is not at all in itself something that can constitute the revolution. The revelation of the hidden I was talking about.
This lady was walking.
Sexuality means all sorts of things. Paper, clothes, the way we behave. The way boys and girls do it one fine day in the open air in the marketplace. C'est bisexuel. To be written is using a special orthography. I strongly recommend the exercise that consists in trying to transform the way we write things. C'est bisexuel. It comes to that. It's quite a revealing exercise and it's very topical. Monsieur Derrida has invented grammatology to entice people who are partial to such things, the ones who at the moment think that just because linguistics has flung everything out, it has been a failure. We have to find applications for it. Try playing around with the spelling. It's one way of dealing with ambiguities, and it's not entirely pointless. Write the formula, say this, etc. You can get a long way, you'll see. That will shed some light. That will shed some light on certain things, and it might spark something in people's minds. The fact that c'est sexuel means that there is a lot of confusion, but that's something completely truth. Psychoanalysts are well aware of that, I must say, and that is why they concern themselves with other things. You'll never hear talk of sexuality in psychoanalytic circles anymore. If you open the psychoanalytic journals, are the chastest things in the world. They no longer tell stories about fucking. They leave that to the dailies. They deal with things that have far-reaching implications for the domain of ethics, like the life instinct. Let's take a very life instinctual view of things that don't trust the death instinct. You see, we are entering the great performance, a higher mythology. There are people who really believe they are in control of all that, and they talk about it as though they were objects we handle every day. In which case, the point is to strike a good balance between them, between tangency and the right intersection, and with the greatest possible economy of effort. And do you know what the ultimate goal is? Gaining what they pompously call a strong ego strength in the midst of all that, and the scientific instances that go with it. And they succeed. They make good employees. That's what the strong ego is. You obviously have to have a resistant ego to be a good employee. They do it at every level, at the level of patients, and then at the level of psychoanalysts. Even so, you have to ask yourself if the ideal end of psychoanalytic cure is really to get some gentleman to earn a bit of more money than before, and when it comes to a sex life, to supplement the moderate help he asks from a conjugal partner with the help he gets from his secretary. When a guy had had a few problems in that domain, or was just leading a hellish life, or had some of those little inhibitions you can have at various levels in the office, at work, and even, why not, in bed, that was usually considered to be a good outcome. When all that has been removed, when the ego is strong and at peace, when the obsession with tits and bums has signed its little peace treaty with the superego, as they say, and when the itch isn't too bad, well, everything is fine. Sexuality is very much a secondary issue and all that. My dear friend Alexander, and he was a friend, and he was a friend, and he wasn't stupid, but given that he was living in America, he answered the call, even said, basically that sexuality should be regarded as a surplus activity. You understand? When you have done everything properly and when you pay your taxes regularly, then what's left is sexuality's share. There must have been a mistake somewhere for things to have reached that point. Otherwise, there is no real explanation as to why it took such a huge theoretical conciliation before psychoanalysis could settle in, even set up its world headquarters there, and then inaugurate this extravagant therapeutic fashion. Well, the discourse is if that's what it is all about. Something really must be wrong. Perhaps we should be looking for something else. We might begin by saying to ourselves that there really must be a reason why sexuality once took on the function of truth, if it was just once, the whole point of being that it was not just once. After all, sexuality just once. After all, sexuality is not all that unacceptable, and once it took on that function, it kept it. What it's all about really is within the reach, or at least within psychoanalysis' reach, and he bears witness to the fact that when he talks about something serious and not about its therapeutic results, what is within reach is the fact that sexuality makes a whole in truth. Whole, H-O-L-E, whole, W-H-O-L-E. Sexuality is precisely the domain, if I can put it that way, where no one knows what to do about what is true. And when it comes to sexual relations, the question of what we are really doing always comes up, I won't say when we say to someone, I love you, because everyone knows that only idiots say that. But when we have a sexual relationship with someone, when that leads to something, when it takes the form of what we call an act is not just something that happens to you just like that, a motor discharge, as analytical theory says, all too quickly and all too often, even if when the certain help of number of artifices, various facilitations, or even thanks to the establishment of a certain promiscuity, we succeed in turning the sexual act into something that has, they say, no more importance than drinking a nice glass of water. That is not true, as you quickly realize, because the whole point is that sometimes you drink a glass of water and then you get diarrhea, and not. It's not straightforward for reasons that have to do with the essence of things in this relationship. We ask ourselves, in other words, if you are really a man, if you are a man, or you are really a woman, if you are a woman. It's not only your partner who asks him, or herself. That question, you ask it too, everyone asks it, and it matters right away. So when I talk about a hole in truth, it is not naturally a crude metaphor. It is not a hole on a jacket. It is the negative aspect that appears in anything to do with the sexual. Namely, its inability to aver, A-V-E-R. That is what a psychoanalyst is all about. When things get off to that kind of start, we obviously can't leave it at that. If we start with a question like that, a question that is really topical and pressing for everyone, we can feel what Freud called sexuality takes on a new meaning from the very beginning. Freud's terms come back to life take on a different import. We even notice that they have a literary import, which is one way of saying how well they lend themselves as letters to manipulating what is at stake. The ideal, of course, is to take things as far as I had begun to push them by God. I pushed the literary specialists to the point where they finally admit that you can succeed in creating a language when you want to avoid ambiguity. Or, in other words, reduce it to the literal, to algebra's little letters. This brings us straight to my second chapter, the origin of my